Beau Maddox stepped up to the noose until the governor offered him a deal: kill the 5 men he once called brothers or swing for all of them. Beau Maddox sat in his cell, the damp stone cold against his cheek. He wasn't thinking about the hanging, not really. He was thinking about the faces. Faces of people he'd hurt, robbed, maybe even killed. They swam in his mind like ghosts in a dusty saloon. His leg throbbed, a constant reminder of Dutch's betrayal. The pain was a small thing, though, compared to the ache in his soul. He'd been a bad man, a real bad man. Now, staring into the darkness, he wondered if there was any good left in him at all. Could a man like him ever be forgiven? Could he ever forgive himself? The questions echoed in the silence, unanswered, heavy as the chains that bound him. Tomorrow, they said, he'd pay for his crimes. But what about all the days before? Could one last act make up for a lifetime of sin? The cell door creaked open, startling Beau. It wasn't the guard. It was a man in a fancy suit, smelling of cigars and something else of power. "Beau Maddox," the man said, his voice smooth as oil. "The governor has taken an interest in your situation." Beau just stared, his eyes hollow. What could the governor possibly want with him? "A deal," the man continued, stepping closer. "A chance to earn your freedom, a full pardon." Beau's breath hitched. "A pardon? Impossible. There's a catch, of course." The man smiled, a cruel, thin line. "You hunt down your old friends, Beau, the ones you rode with, you kill them, all 5. And the pardon is yours." Beau stared at the man, the words echoing in his ears. Kill or be killed. Was that really his only choice? He thought of the faces again, but this time they weren't just victims. They were Dutch, Wiley, Rose, people he'd shared campfire meals with, people he'd laughed with even as they did terrible things. The governor's man watched him, patient as a vulture. "Well, Maddox, do we have an agreement?" Beau swallowed, the lump in his throat hard to ignore. He was already a killer. What was 5 more souls on his conscience? But these were his asterisk souls, his responsibility. "I'll do it," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "But I want it in writing, signed by the governor himself." A few hours later, Beau was pushed out of the prison gates. The document was clutched in his hand, the governor's signature a stark black mark against the yellowed paper. His leg was still a mess, held together with makeshift splints. He leaned heavily on a rough-hewn crutch. He looked out at the dusty landscape, a vast and unforgiving expanse. 5 men, 5 sins to atone for. It seemed impossible, but a sliver of hope flickered within him. Maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to clean the slate. To finally find some peace, even if it meant walking through hell to get there. He took a deep breath and started hobbling down the road. A gruff guard met him outside the gates, tossing a worn rifle and a small pouch at his feet. "That's all you get, Maddox," he grunted. "Don't expect any favors." Beau picked up the rifle. It was heavy and old, but it would have to do. He opened the pouch. A few bullets, some dried meat, and a canteen half filled with water. Enough to get started, maybe. It was clear. They didn't expect him to succeed. He was just a pawn, a means to an end. If he died out there, so be it. Less trouble for them. The realization hardened his resolve. He wouldn't make it easy for them. He would see this through, one way or another. He checked the rifle, the metal cold against his calloused hand. Time to hunt. It took him 3 days, hobbling and riding on the occasional passing wagon, to reach the town of Redemption. Irony wasn't lost on Beau. Wiley was said to be running a gambling den there. The saloon was smoky and loud. Beau spotted him at a card table, a fat, greasy man with a cruel smile. Wiley. He hadn't changed a bit. Still counting other people's money, Beau limped towards him, the crutch thudding against the wooden floor. The noise drew Wiley's attention. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. "Beau. What in the hell?" "Wiley," Beau said, his voice low and gravelly. "We need to talk." The other men at the table shifted nervously. The air crackled with tension. This was it. The first reckoning. Beau's words hung in the air, but his mind was elsewhere. The bank, Dusty Gulch, 5 years ago. He saw it all again, Wiley laughing as he pistol-whipped the teller. the terrified screams of the townsfolk, and him, Beau, standing guard, rifle raised, preventing anyone from escaping. They'd gotten away with a fortune that day, leaving a trail of broken lives behind them. He remembered a young girl, crying for her father, who lay bleeding on the floor. Wiley had shot him for reaching for a hidden gun. That girl's face, it still haunted Beau's dreams. He snapped back to the present. Wiley was watching him, a glint of fear in his eyes. The past was catching up to them both. Wiley lunged for his gun, but Beau was faster. He raised the rifle, his hands shaking slightly. He didn't want to do this, but he had no choice. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the saloon, silencing the room. Wiley crumpled to the floor, a look of disbelief on his face. The shot wasn't clean, blood splattered across the card table, mixing with the spilled whiskey. Beau lowered the rifle, his chest heaving. He felt sick. The deed was done. He'd killed a man, again, but this time it felt different. This time it was a step towards something. He didn't know what, but it wasn't the empty darkness he'd known before. He turned and limped out of the saloon, leaving Wiley's body behind. The weight of his past pressed down on him, heavier than ever. Beau left redemption, heading north. Creek was a tracker. He'd disappear into the wilderness if he felt threatened. It took almost a week, following rumors and faint trails, his legs screaming with every step. He finally found him in a small, isolated cabin near the mountains. Smoke curled from the chimney. Beau approached cautiously, rifle in hand. This wouldn't be like Wiley. Creek wasn't cruel, he was just lost. He knocked on the door. A moment later it opened, revealing a weathered face and piercing eyes. Creek. He looked older, but the same quiet dignity remained. He stared at Beau, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Maddox," he said, his voice soft but firm. "What do you want?" The campfire, bitter cold. Dutch was drunk, making fun of Creek's heritage. Beau remembered how he'd stepped in, telling Dutch to leave him alone. It wasn't much, but it was something. He'd shared his blanket with Creek that night, a small act of kindness in a world of cruelty. He remembered Creek's surprised look, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. It was a rare moment of connection, a brief glimpse of humanity amidst the violence. He hadn't always been a monster. There was a part of him that still cared, that still saw the good in others, even when they were at their lowest. The memory faded, leaving Beau with a renewed sense of unease. This was going to be harder than he thought. "I know why you're here, Maddox," Creek said, his gaze unwavering. "The governor's deal." He sighed. "I left that life behind a long time ago. I live in peace now. I have a family." Beau lowered the rifle slightly. "I don't want to do this, Creek." "Then don't," Creek replied simply. "Walk away." Beau hesitated, the pardon, freedom, but at what cost? Could he really kill a man who had found peace? A man who had done nothing to deserve this. He was at a crossroads, the weight of his decision crushing him. Kill an innocent man or throw away his last chance at redemption. The choice was his, and it was tearing him apart. Beau looked at Creek, then at the rifle in his hands. He thought of the girl in Dusty Gulch, of Wiley's cruel laugh. He thought of all the senseless violence he'd been a part of. He couldn't do it anymore. He lowered the rifle completely, letting it hang loosely at his side. "Get out of here, Creek," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Take your family and go, disappear." Creek nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Thank you, Maddox." He turned and disappeared into the cabin. Beau watched him go, knowing he'd just signed his own death warrant. The governor wouldn't forgive this. But as he turned and started walking away, he felt a strange sense of peace. He'd made the right choice, even if it was the last one he ever made. Knowing he was now a dead man walking, Beau pressed on. Rose was in Silver Creek, running a saloon called the Dusty Rose. It wasn't hard to find. He pushed open the doors, the familiar scent of stale beer and cheap perfume filling his nostrils. Rose was behind the bar, her face etched with weariness. She looked up, her eyes widening as she recognized him. "Beau," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the din. "What are you doing here?" He saw the fear in her eyes, the ghosts of their shared past flickering across her face. Rose had been through hell, and he was about to bring it all back. He just hoped she could understand why. He just hoped she could forgive him. Rose, younger, more vibrant, but with a shadow in her eyes. Dutch forcing her to entertain some unsavory characters. Beau remembered the night he'd found her crying in the stables, Dutch having gone too far. He'd offered her a blanket, a kind word, a promise to keep her safe. It wasn't much, but it was all he could do. He'd seen the fear in her eyes, the desperation. Rose hadn't chosen that life. She'd been forced into it, a pawn in Dutch's twisted game. He'd always felt a responsibility for her, a need to protect her from the worst of it. Even though he was part of the problem, back in the saloon, Rose's eyes searched his. He knew she remembered, too. Their shared history, a tangled web of guilt and unspoken failings. Beau explained the deal, the governor, everything. Rose listened in silence, her face unreadable. When he was finished, she simply nodded. "I always knew it would end like this," she said, her voice flat. "Dutch always said we'd all pay for our sins." Then a flicker of something else appeared in her eyes, determination. "I'll help you, Beau," she said. "I know where Silas is, and I have a feeling I know where Dutch is hiding." She wanted redemption, too. A chance to make amends for the things she'd done, the things she'd been forced to do. By helping Beau, she could finally face her own demons. They formed a pact, bound by their shared past and a desperate hope for a better future. Rose directed him to a rundown shack on the outskirts of town. Silas was inside, she said, a broken man. Beau approached cautiously, his rifle ready. He kicked the door open. Silas was sitting in a wheelchair, his legs gone, his face gaunt and lined with regret. He looked up, his eyes filled with a deep, unshakable sadness. "Beau," he croaked, his voice raspy, "I knew you'd come." The room was filled with the smell of dust and despair. Silas was a shadow of his former self, consumed by the guilt of the lives he'd destroyed with his explosives. This wasn't going to be a fight. This was going to be something else entirely. Something even harder, the train robbery, Silas's perfect plan. But the dynamite was faulty. The explosion ripped through the passenger cars, killing dozens of innocent people. Beau remembered the screams, the chaos, the mangled bodies. It was supposed to be a clean job, just taking money from the rich. But Silas's mistake had turned it into a massacre. That day changed everything for Beau. He saw the true cost of their actions, the devastating impact they had on innocent lives. It was the beginning of his disillusionment, the moment he started questioning everything he'd ever believed in. He saw Silas lose his legs that day too, caught in the blast. Looking at Silas now, Beau knew the guilt had eaten him alive, far more than any explosion ever could. Beau opened his mouth to speak, to offer some kind of comfort, but the words caught in his throat. He didn't know what to say, he just stood there watching Silas. Suddenly, Silas reached under his blanket. Beau tensed, but it was too late. Silas pulled out a small pistol and before Beau could react, shot himself in the head. The sound was deafening in the small shack. Silas slumped forward, lifeless. Beau stared in shock, the rifle falling from his grasp. He hadn't killed Silas, but his presence had been enough. The weight of his past, his influence, had driven another man to his death. The guilt was almost unbearable. He staggered out of the shack, the image of Silas's lifeless body burned into his mind. What kind of redemption was this? Rose knew where Dutch was hiding, an old abandoned mine up in the mountains. She'd drawn him a map, her face grim. "Be careful, Beau," she'd said. "He's expecting you." Beau reached the mine at dusk, the air cold and thin. He could feel Dutch's presence, a dark and menacing energy that hung in the air. This was it, the final reckoning. He entered the mine cautiously, his rifle raised. The darkness swallowed him whole. Then a voice echoed from the depths, cold and cruel. "Well, well, Beau, I knew you'd come crawling back." Dutch stepped into the light, his face a mask of hatred. "It's time to finish what we started." The argument. Beau telling Dutch he was done. He couldn't live like that anymore. Dutch laughing, calling him weak. Then the blow, the searing pain in his leg. Dutch had smashed his leg with a rock, leaving him for dead. He'd woken up in a prison cell, charged with crimes he hadn't committed. Dutch had framed him, ensuring he'd rot in jail. That was Dutch's way. Loyalty meant nothing to him. Beau's hand tightened around the rifle. It wasn't just about the governor's deal anymore. It was about revenge, about finally settling the score with the man who had ruined his life. The hate burned within him, hotter than any fire. Dutch lunged, knife in hand. Beau fired, but Dutch dodged, the bullet ricocheting off the mine wall. The fight was on. It was brutal, personal. Beau, hampered by his broken leg, fought with a ferocity born of years of resentment. Dutch, fueled by pure rage, was a whirlwind of violence. They grappled, punched, kicked, their bodies slamming against the rough mine walls. The air filled with the sounds of grunts, curses, and the sickening thud of flesh against flesh. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a battle for their souls. A culmination of all the choices they'd made, all the sins they'd committed. It was a fight to the death. Beau finally managed to disarm Dutch, pinning him to the ground. He raised his fist, ready to deliver the final blow. But then he hesitated. He looked at Dutch's face, twisted with hatred and fear. He saw not a monster, but a broken man, consumed by his own demons. And he realized that killing Dutch wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't bring back the dead, it wouldn't erase his own sins, it would just make him another killer. The anger drained away, replaced by a profound sense of weariness. He lowered his fist, the victory hollow and meaningless. He couldn't do it. He couldn't become the very thing he was trying to escape. Beau hauled Dutch to his feet, ignoring his protests. He dragged him out of the mine, the rising sun casting long shadows across the landscape. He knew what he had to do. He walked Dutch all the way to Silver Creek, his leg aching with every step. He turned him over to the sheriff, explaining everything. The governor's deal, the murders, everything. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. It was a way to finally take responsibility for his actions, to show the world that he was trying to be a better man. He'd broken his deal, but he'd found something more important, a path towards true redemption, even if it led straight to the gallows. Back in his cell, Beau waited. He knew the governor wouldn't keep his word. He was too corrupt, too powerful. Beau was a loose end, a threat to his carefully constructed empire of lies. A few days later, the fancy-suited man from the governor arrived. He didn't even bother to pretend. "The governor sends his regards, Maddox," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "He says you failed to fulfill your end of the bargain." The pardon was torn up, the pieces fluttering to the floor like fallen leaves. Beau just nodded unsurprised. He'd known this was coming. The governor was a snake, and snakes always bite. He'd gambled and lost, but he'd won something else, something far more valuable. The day of the hanging arrived, cold and gray. Beau walked to the gallows with a steady step, his head held high. He wasn't afraid anymore. He'd done what he could to atone for his past. He'd shown mercy, he'd sought justice, and he'd faced his demons. He might not have earned a pardon, but he'd earned something far more important, peace. As the noose was placed around his neck, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He was ready. He was finally ready to face whatever came next. He'd cleaned up the mess he could, starting with the worst man of all, himself, and that was enough, or so he hoped. Just as the hangman was about to pull the lever, a shout rang out. "Stop, stop this execution." Beau opened his eyes. He saw Creek and Rose pushing through the crowd, faces determined. Rose held up a stack of papers. "We have evidence," she cried. "Evidence that proves the governor is corrupt. That he framed Beau Maddox." Creek stepped forward, his voice strong and clear. "The governor used Beau to silence his enemies. He's been taking bribes, manipulating the law for his own gain." A murmur went through the crowd. The sheriff hesitated, looking uncertain. Was it possible? Had Beau been telling the truth all along? A glimmer of hope flickered in Beau's heart. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end after all. Maybe there was still a chance for a new life.